Yeah, one of those wasn't very before you had $2 later. Just 3 minutes later. Oh,
Well, something's making your hand wave and it was magic. Yeah, that's right. Thank you.
thank you. Do you want any candy?
No, thank you.
I supplied us.
You can take that home.
No, no, this goes in the.
John, I think you're still up. So moving to the next agenda item, municipal code review. Is there something, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I thought we'd finished the conversation there. Is there anything more that we talked about, some lessons learned, but is there anything specific? Okay. Okay. Okay.
The action item.
Okay. Okay, so, but if there are specific ordinance, both in terms of ordinance changes and then just operationally from a process standpoint? Okay, good. Well, and this feeds into the bigger topic of the municipal and zoning code review. Is this both a municipal and zoning code?
This is just municipal.
Oh, just municipal, okay.
Just municipal right now, because you guys said, as council had approved the zoning rewrite,
yeah.
but we put that up, on burner, so.
So do
this
you
is
want to
just-
talk about this then?
Well, this is just one of the things we've been trying to work on, I think, Diane Heidensfelders, for at least probably a year, year and a half, working with staff. There's things that we have brought forth some stuff, but if there's things that we find that's inconsistent, or you all come across that's inconsistent with the municipal code, some of the things that we have done update on, if I recall, we did, help remind me, what did we do? We did a few things that I just can't think off the top of my head. And that's coming back, right? I think the yard debris, which. It was 2 or 3, yeah. There was another one where there were inconsistencies.
So it's really more about, the objective of the project that I started and then had to hand over to John Moffett when I took over the ARB and then, got involved in it again when John left late last year. So we started out basically the project with talking to staff, department heads, what they actually knew in their area of responsibility were their inconsistencies. Inconsistencies could mean a lot of things. Either it's not clearly defined, or it's ambiguous, or something is missing, or it might not even comply with state law anymore. And we encourage them to provide feedback. I think the biggest feedback, for example, we got from Jim about 4 or 5 different areas, if I remember correctly, where, improvements, would be warranted. So that's how we started out. We're still missing some input from department heads in that respect. And then based on that, and again, proposing ordinances and then bring it for council for approval, like we've done with a few of them over the last couple of months. But those were more kind of quick hits somewhere that we discovered, like the purchasing ordinance. You will remember that one community member stood up and said something about it, and then we made a change and approved it. Or I discovered, something about the yard debris, there was a disconnect between our contract with the yacht, with the waste collection company and what it was written in our ordinances. But I think what we wanted always to do, but we're always struggling with finding the time and the resources, is really going systematically, more systematically through our ordinance book and look for, stuff that could be better worded, should be more clear, should be more comprehensive, etc. But we never got to that point.
Well, we're going to do that, though, with the walkover, so that's going to move forward. We're going to improve that.
And again, we have done it in several areas, but never systematically.
Yes, that is true.
That's kind of the piecemeal. In some respects, it's not dissimilar from the issues with regard to the zoning code, land development regulations, is, the town had just adopted or onboarded a lot of stuff that existed elsewhere, and then it's been a hodgepodge of changes that have been made in the interim, and it's kind of my clear sense, because there are a lot of inconsistencies. There are a lot of ordinances that don't, they set a general policy, but there's no real direction provided staff as to how you actually are intended to enforce that, implement that, yeah. And so, yes, the challenge is, again, given we've outlined a huge number of projects here and resource constraints from the council members and the staff standpoint, is how we onboard that and operationalize that, because a rewrite of, we've already talked about getting or approved, I think, getting a consultant to assist with the ZLDR, but the municipal code involves the same kind of undertaking. No disrespect to any of the individual staff members or even to the town administrator. I'm just not sure we have like somebody that's within the town administration right now that has the kind of the bandwidth, let alone kind of the real capability set to look at all of the code and how it fits together. So then the question becomes, we can just kind of continue to identify little things that are piecemeal and fix those as we see them, or do we need to also think about somebody that, whether we use our own law firm, which is going to be a particularly expensive undertaking, or somebody else that has the type of experience like they do on ZLDR to take a fresh look at maybe rewriting our municipal code in its entirety.
So the way I thought about this, because exactly how you're describing it and how I said it earlier, we have this task now for 1 year, and we didn't really get far. We made some changes, but far. So we can do two things. One, we assign one of us that always takes care of looking into a particular topic we identify. I'll give you an example. I think now for the third time we came across this mayor pro tem ordinance, right? It's not necessarily wrong, but it's not very well written, right? And there's a little bit of interpretation and mishmash, especially in that third paragraph of that ordinance, etc. So whenever we identify this, we have one of the five of us who would then really take this on, because he or she is that assigned person, and work with staff on a rewrite and then bring it to council, so that we never lose sight of something we discovered. So that is the minimal version. The next would be that we are saying, we do hire a consultant that works with us, but on a kind of a piecemeal approach, 2 months at a time or something, or 2 months of the year, and we go through different chapters of the ordinance book step by step. That would then, of course, be like a 5-year project, but at least we would make progress in a more systematic fashion without overwhelming us and our finances. But at least we could say and would see progress by looking at improvements step by step. So we would take one section at a time, for example, or 2 sections at the time and go through these. That could be another element. Or we would do the big approach and do it similar to the zoning code and hire a consultant that would go with us through everything. But if we have the resources for that is a question as well. So.
And I can't recall how much are we budgeting for our ZLDR consultant?
Is it 150?
It's not cheap.
No, it's not.
It was not cheap.
No.
That's why I thought, piecemealing it and say, hey, we are dedicating 100,000 per year.
And the
Something like
question is, does piecemealing will clean up stuff, but what does it really achieve the objectives of making sure we have a coherent, cohesive municipal code?
Well, I was gonna what's the cost-benefit analysis say? You're gonna spend $500,000 to clean up the codes for what gain?
What, Michael?
Well, there are some things that, I mean, it's not, yes, clarity is one point, one issue. There are some inconsistencies. In some cases, we literally just say things that then are impossible to really implement and enforce because there is no clarity about what the enforcement might entail. Yeah.
True.
And it's,
Yeah, that is
so one thing, but this is still part of that process. It doesn't have to be the case that the ordinance actually lays all of that out. And in fact, if you deal with it at the federal government level, you have kind of broad enabling legislation, and then the regulatory agency or the agency responsible for implementing adopts some rules and regulations thereunder. We've never adopted, as a town, the rules and regulations pertaining to any of those provisions that just say the town shall do something, without specifying who, what the criteria are, what the follow-up mechanisms are, or anything. So we could do that, but that's just as a comprehensive as exercise as, looking at all those provisions.
One thing, Mayor, could be, the way before, it was kind of like, I think, a little bit, when we started, we had staff. And then when staff looked at it, I think one probably issue or concern was that it may have touched on a lot of different sections here. If we're wanting to kind of go through this systematically, it could be very, sit down with a council person, if, Dr. Henfelder wanted, we do that. And it may be that we just really just kind of say, okay, not that chapter, but start off with Article 2. Let's just take off small bites. Let's focus on anything in Article 2 that we need to make changes to. If not, check off, go to the next article, Article 3. And if there's a staff person that touches on certain articles, that's when we bring them in and say, okay, here's your section of the article. Does it look okay? Are there any changes? Maybe just as simple as doing something like that.
And that, but even there, just, you start looking at Article 2.
Yeah.
Immediate things that come to mind that if you simply fixed it in Article
Right.
2, for example, attorney to attend and duties, clerk to attend and duties. Well, you could fix right there, but the fact is, there's also another provision of the municipal code that outlines the duties for the attorney and the town clerk.
Yeah, well, yeah,
So,
yeah, we have to bring
and
those
so you
together.
have to, I mean, we're just looking at this, you would kind of miss that, you might eliminate one section.
But no, what I was just saying, right, so you would start with, right, right. Right,
The next section of what, the next section of you would of course always search for,
right,
would that matter be reflected in other parts of the
yeah,
ordinance, and probably touch on that too.
right,
So it's not just, that we focus only on section 2 or section 3.
right,
It would be, more comprehensive, but in a step-by-step.
right, correct.
I have a kind of a fundamental question. So is the project born out of anything more than an increased desire for clarity or an increased desire for more clarity? Or has there been a problem that this would tackle?
Well, as Brad pointed out earlier, so it's the clarity, eliminating the ambiguous topic, eliminating where we probably are in conflict with state law. But also then to make sure that we have clear rules like we just talked about. If there is a violation, who is responsible for pointing that out? Who is responsible to enforcing it? what are the fines, what are the procedures to eliminate a violation, et cetera. So often that does not exist, right?
And you can't enforce violations unless it's prohibited, and then you've got to have some mechanism. There's got to be essentially a fining regime spelled out, or some appeal mechanism and things like that as a matter of administration.
So it is necessary.
So then, when there are fines that exist actually, they're often in today's world not appropriate anymore because, you know, what does a $50 fine really mean nowadays?
500s are fine.
Yeah, but so there are also proportionality issues, right, that might have been correct 30 years ago, because at that time, 30 years ago, whatever that fine was might have been appropriate. Today's maybe not. So there are also these kind of updating, bringing it in today's world kind of topics.
The first option that you put forward, when you talk about a council person working on a particular section, would that council person assigned change depending on the article or the section? Or would you have one council person that would be responsible for all of it?
No, I mean, the first proposal I made was just for those things that we identify along the way. Okay, so we realized, like the Mayor Pro Tem topic that we, I think, came across the first time in probably November or so last year when John Moffett resigned, that there are some clarity issues. So this one person of ours would then take that and work with either a department head or with MAC on improving it and bringing it back to us with a proposal. So that we just have one person who always takes care of whatever we identify, for whatever reason.
So the same
And then there would be a
person.
separate project in whatever fashion, either, again, led by the same council person or by a different council person, that would go more systematically through our ordinance book. That's what I meant.
One example we need to just clean up, a bunch of our provisions, like restraint of pets, you know, we've talked about that. Is all that the ordinance says is penalty. Any person or entity in violation of the provision shall be subject to the Town of Kiowa Island Municipal Code, Chapter 1, General Provisions, and then is all it references back to is whenever the municipal judge finds a party guilty, they can impose a fine not to exceed $500. And there's no process.
No, yeah, there's a process. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
With regard to issuing a notice, whether you issue a warning, a notice of violation.
Yeah, some of this, I think what we'll look at is that some of those levels of details, you're not going to find in any municipal ordinance. But you will find to say.
They have to be rules and regulations.
Right. What you would find is you can say for the first violation, it's going to be X amount. For the second violation, you can say that, or the way that we have it is up to $500 that you can be fined. What that equates to, if you get fined, it equates to $1,080 once you add the assessments on there.
Right now, we have no, as an example, we don't have any written policy or procedure as to whether somebody in the town is making a decision, you're getting a warning, or you're getting a $100 fine, or you're getting a $300 fine.
Sure.
And then it's just none of that.
Yeah, sure. We can look at, I think, others, because some of the things I think that you're asking, we can look to make sure that we're essentially in compliance with other local governments are doing with regards to municipal codes. It could be, do we need to say the code enforcement officer is the one that issues the fine? Under finance department, it's the finance director that's the ones that essentially can revoke a business license. So I think that we can definitely get a little bit more specificity to our code so that it's clear. There's certain things in there that you and I have talked about because you've asked if there are regulations, and I said since I've been here there hasn't. In regards to weddings, as an example, I think right now it's something about the town administrator, and so I said in practice what we've done is that if it's 10 people, good, but then there's certain things you can't do. So I think just over practice, this is what was boiled down to me or given to me, and I essentially have been executing that out. So yeah, I think those are some things, and that we've talked about before, and it actually, I think, came to council, and it actually got, I think, tabled, which was the wedding and fireworks. So we did try to make changes to that. It got tabled, but we need to bring that back to you guys, not just let it die. And that's one of the things that I just need to put down on kind of my list of things.
Well, but in, again.
And working through all this other
Some of
stuff.
those, and I think the council needs to make a decision,
Right.
how, does the council really, is it the best body to get down into the deal? Other than, for example, the town shall promulgate regulations regarding the use of fireworks or the prohibition thereof, and that's all the council, that's all the ordinance says. And then there are a set of, then it simply empowers the administration, the regulatory body, to adopt rules and regulations, or the town, the council, the legislative body can be very specific as to what it wants.
Yeah, that was-
Those are the kinds of things we just, it's a mishmash right now.
Yeah, that was going to be my question is, it sounds like we need to decide on the approach, whether we do it in the ordinance or whether we refer to rules and regulations of the town and have somebody else do the rules, the fines, whatever.
And again, some are extraordinarily detailed in the ordinance,
Probably,
and some just virtually say nothing. And so.
And in most cases, probably those that are very detailed have been touched more recently, and others that are more broad have probably never been touched.
And it could have been the case, those who were touched didn't necessarily need to be all that detailed in an ordinance, but that we've never had a mindset, I don't think, as a town, about adopting a series of rules and regulations to implement more broadly worded ordinances. It's always been, okay, then the council will get into the weeds and every jot and tittle of a particular issue embedded in the ordinance itself.
so are we coalesced around a strategy for doing this, or how do we, can we make a decision, or?
Well, so, I mean, and it's going to be, to some extent, a case-by-case basis, but I guess conceptually, does the council on a go-forward basis, and I don't have a strong view about this, want to be in the position of the granular level detail with regard to any particular issue being captured in the ordinance? Or that the ordinance tends to be a little bit more general, provide direction, clear direction to what is expected in rules and regulations, then it's up to the administrative apparatus to actually develop rules and regulations around that. I don't have a strong view. We just have said.
I don't either. I would probably tilt toward being more broad in the ordinances and then have a rules and regulations handbook that, something that can be owned and reviewed on a routine basis, and maybe it's signed off on by the mayor, or,
It may be at a case-by-case, basis. There's some that, like on, weddings, I suspect, or something, events on the beach. It probably not the best use of council's time to get
Agreed.
kind of down into the weeds on hours, requirements, glass, and, cleanup and all of that, but that should be subject to, a set of rules and regulations, but that are applicable to anybody that comes in and seeks.
As an example, we have rules and regulations, and this is probably because it's fairly new with this building. If you want to rent this building space, we have a town hall rental application that's online, and it outlines the rules, essentially the rules.
It doesn't really, it doesn't, I don't think it has rules as to things like for partisan events or not.
It has some, yes. At the time, the council, when they did, when they created that, some things we just didn't address because we didn't think of. It may be now that we need to go back because we're now getting requests for other stuff. Like, they were very particular on they had a big discussion on if they want to allow weddings here, and that was one of the things that they didn't want to allow. So there are some specificity in terms of rules.
That's not something, did the council decide that, or just, this council just said, we really would not like to see that?
Yeah, it was, I'm trying to think, it was actually a discussion that they had, and out of the discussion, we, as staff, created,
Okay.
those
What kind of
rules.
groups are looking at renting this?
Well, right now, the groups that we typically have renting are HOAs normally rent on weekends to have their HOA meetings. The Conservancy uses it to, for their events that they have, that if they can't have the Sandcastle, they'll rent it here. We have, other than town staff maybe doing some events here, we have the festival that the Shorebird Festival was here, but
Do we have to have, like Brian or somebody like Brian here when it's being rented?
when it's being rented, we do charge a fee, that if it's after hours, there is a fee, because we have to have staff here. It's either Brian or Petra is here, and especially, yeah, we charge a fee for after hours. If it's during business hours, we do not charge a fee in our kind of, not contract, but requirement, we do not set up either. And they have to leave it in the condition they found it. We do require a deposit. They could deposit back, of course, if it's left in the condition they found it.
Right, so there's somebody here that locks the door after they're all gone.
Yep, open and lock if it's after hours.
Also sometimes used, by families for gatherings or.
Yeah,
you know,
an Arts
after-
Guild,
after a
Kiowa.
funeral or something. We had a case recently.
We had a funeral here, Kiowa Arts Guild do their Saturday sales, or when they, I think, twice a year annually. They use our facility on weekend, and Brian or someone is here, normally here.
Do you allow food caterers to come in?
We do not allow in here. I think we have certain requirements, like you can't have red wine and different things, but, and I think with food, you can't, I think you can have prepared food.
Yeah.
I think is what we say, but not like, food caterers in here cooking or anything like that, not unless they have, outside,
White
but.
wine's okay?
I think we had that. I remember having that discussion that we don't want the carpet.
Okay.
That's the reason why. Even though these are squares, and the reason why this was built this way is you can pull the squares up, but we did have a discussion on that.
By the way, one issue that has come up is more recently is the use of the municipal center for partisan political events. I don't know if council members have a particular view about that, since it's always, it caused me some, I was thinking about that cautiously, because this is a nonpartisan
Yeah,
body.
I don't want partisan things.
So
Definitely not.
that was my inclination as well. Then it starts, well, is it couched as an educational event? Well, they can be couched as an educational event, but that's just a veneer, because every one of the educational individuals is somebody with a particular political party who is actually in active campaign.
And if it looks like a duck, walks like a
Yeah,
duck.
so
quacks like a
so that's a little bit
We
of.
got caught up in that last,
Yeah.
we got caught up in that last year, where one said it was going to be education, turned out not so. So the other group said, well, if you let one, you have to let the other. And so this year, we got a request back, and we talked to the mayor, and we just said no more.
So on this topic, let me discuss it further with staff, with Stephanie, and also our new town attorney, since he himself represents two different other municipalities. Five, and their firm probably does some other representation as well, whether there are either some models out there, or they're aware of maybe some consulting assistance, or there's another way to tackle this. But for example, it's a piecemeal approach. He's already just sent, because they were working on another context, a draft new requisition procurement ordinance. In addition, we had asked him to come up with a model contract, a standard form of municipal contract. Well, in fact, that's exactly what they were already doing, I think, for Hanahan. So we just piggybacked a little bit on that work. So there may be some opportunities, and then we can circle back if we need to get individual council members who are interested involved in certain aspects of this, then we can do that.
Sure.
Okay? Development agreements and PDDs. We have, one development agreement is expired. The resort has indicated a desire to enter into a new development agreement. Whether any other development agreements are likely to be pursued at any point in time by the applicant remains to be seen. There's certainly the potential for the submission of applications for planned development districts. And so the idea here was, if we if these are forthcoming, what do we want to think about these from a more conceptual standpoint? What are our goals and objectives to be achieved? And I would note that at least with regard to the development agreements, they're governed by the State Local Development Agreement Act and has a number of provisions and requirements associated with that. And just, everybody knows this, but just to reset, and Madeline and Luke haven't been as part of these discussions to the same extent, that the whole idea behind a development agreement is a mutually beneficial compact between a developer of a planned community and a municipality. And the idea is that the developer gets benefit of knowing what the rules of the road are for some period of time, a maximum up to, well, the maximum amount of time which they can rely on current zoning standards depends on the size of the planned development. More recently, it's been a 10-year maximum under state law. And so they get clear benefit from not being whipsawed by future changes in zoning standards. And the quid pro quo is they're committing private capital to develop infrastructure and parcel subdivision of parcels, amenities and what have you, that the community would not, the municipality would not otherwise have the resources to provide. So it's both sides benefit from the idea of this agreement going forward. And so the question is that kind of the mindset that we want to approach these things in the past? What do we think about duration? What we've learned is under the last development agreement, which is actually, for all intents and purposes, been in place for 3 decades or more. It's different iterations, is even in the last 10 years, circumstances can change pretty dramatically. But the planned development agreement is about the only state law exception to the general requirement that you can't bind future councils. You can't bind future legislative bodies. That is a clear exception to that. The state has said, because of the benefits to the community flowing from the private developer, we'll make an exception, and you tie the council's hands, future council's hands, for whatever the length, the duration is of the development agreement. We learned that over the last 10 years, it's tough to foresee how things can plan out over that period of time. And then it constrains the ability of future councils to adjust to changing circumstances. So, you know, there is a potential benefit, but there's also a potential cost to the community. So that's one thing to just think about, teeing up the issue with regard to development agreements and what we might want to think about those. With planned development districts, the unique aspect of a PDD is that you are not constrained by the, you're smiling.
Oh, no, you're good. No, you're good.
You're not constrained by the zoning standards that would be applicable to by right development. So all the zoning standards that John is reviewing right now in the context of existing site plan applications, if there were a planned development district, both parties could sit down and say, you know, let's adjust those setback requirements, those building height requirements,
Like
density
Endo West is
requirements,
doing.
just like Endo West. So you can almost have a blank slate in how you approach this. Freshfields was a PDD. So
Well, the only risk for that is if you get a particular kind of council, I guess, that will favor setbacks, I'll use that as an example, that really the rest of us would not like at all. And that then can negatively bind the community to something that nobody really wants, but they're stuck with, rather than the development agreement.
I would just kind of, though interject there, with the PDD, if it's done properly in the process, that involves a lot of community participation, like Andal West, so that, no,
Okay,
so council.
that should not happen.
Correct.
That should not happen.
Correct. You're getting
Well, I
community
mean, it
buy,
could
it should,
happen.
it could, but it shouldn't.
Could happen,
Well,
but a PDD process involves the planning commission and their approval, respectively their recommendation, which already is a public process, and then it would go through council with, again, you know, two
So it should not
readings and a public hearing, et cetera. So there's enough of those that would make it, you know, public and inclusive, right? History has shown that when we had PDDs, Brad mentioned the Endel West, but also Freshfields, that usually, my impression at least, is that the agreements in the PDD are more favorable than in our zoning codes
To who? Favorable to?
to the community. Because, for example, when you look at Freshfields, you know, there's a lot more, you know, setbacks, more clearly defined, you know, vegetation coverage along the roads, et cetera, not to see the parking lot and stuff like that. So I think in general, if it's done right, you know, they can turn out actually more beneficial for the community than just going by the zoning code.
Well, but absolutely right. It should be a real give and take and lead to a clear win-win relative to the status quo for both parties. Because I don't think any developer would agree to a planned development district unless they got some benefit relative to pursuing by right development. Otherwise, they would just
Otherwise, they
pursue-
wouldn't do it, so of course, it has to be a quid pro quo,
It
of
has
course.
to be a benefit.
Otherwise, it wouldn't happen.
But if you look at the examples where we had PDDs, and Freshfields is a good one, I think it turned out pretty okay.
did.
So,
If there are lawsuits that derive over the course of the development of either of these two alternatives, is one easier to defend than the other?
I'm not sure you understand. You're talking about rezoning. So with the PDD, because there generally shouldn't be any lawsuits, so the zoning's in place and the community's working with the developer, so it's like a give and take, so there really wouldn't be any lawsuits. I think what you're referring to, I guess, if municipalities change directions of a zone, of just a regular Euclidean zoning district, and some can argue that through regulatory actions, you've downgraded or downzoned our property. But normally a PDD, I think for the right PDD, I would think a lot of developers would welcome that because it does allow more flexibility, does allow more conversation. Now in South Carolina, it has to be a mixed use. But I don't think that there's a lot of, I haven't seen, and maybe John or others know of lawsuits coming out of the PDD, and maybe Mark Permar working in the planning world have heard of potential lawsuits coming out of PDD, but I haven't. Mainly it's coming out of just regulatory or just regular basic zoning when you may be considered downzoning or changing other regulatory actions. But PDDs are built in so much flexibility for both developer and the town, the community, that typically it should be a win-win situation where you rarely have any lawsuits.
I think
Brad, what are you looking for here? It looks like we just want to have a discussion. It's almost like an academic, educational outlook. as to
Well,
what these are.
it's, at this juncture, although I would note that there might be worth looking at our development agreement ordinance, only in this respect, compared to the planned development district, annexation, or even site plan review. It has a very minimal set of procedural and substantive requirements. I mean, it simply says you have to hold 2 public hearings and 2 ordinance readings, and that's it. There are no other criteria others than the lead-in is the purpose and intent is to encourage a developer to make major capital facilities investment commitment based on comprehensive long-term planning and ensures the adequate provision of public facilities. But that is not much beyond that, whereas there are more detailed procedures for almost every other type of development initiative or path.
Okay,
forward.
so unfortunately for me, I only know the ordinances for the most part of Kiowa. I don't really know what other towns do, so I'm going to refer to Stephanie, if you can help enlighten us if there is better way to do it that you've seen with other towns. I don't have any of the data to compare to.
I would have to go back and look. I know that there's been some recent ones done in Bluffton area I think, one with Palmetto Bluff, Mark. I
There-
can't
there-
see over
there
there,
are
but there's,
definitely development agreements.
yeah, there's development agreements.
You
all-
in Mount Pleasant also.
yeah, but I'm just trying to think of some that may be really good ones that we can look at that they've done.
But the question really is,
I know
it's
Ion
not so
may
much
be
about the
one.
development agreement itself, because that's really very individual. So that's
Yes,
not a
it is.
copy and pasting.
Right.
That's a very, complex piece of legislation at the end of the day, I guess, that is very tailored. So when you go, for example, through the development agreement for Freshfields, it's a multi-page document. So the biggest risk from my point of view, when I looked and studied Freshfields last year, is more that because of the amount of paperwork and the complexity is that you sometimes then get lost in or overlook certain details. So for example, when you go through the Freshfields, what is it called, Brad? Permitted uses.
Yep.
Okay, and you go through with your today's eyes, right? You might stumble over a few permitted uses where you say, no, I mean,
Yeah,
not that,
right.
no,
I can see
right?
that.
So that can happen.
Yeah, I can see
right? And was probably an oversight from both sides, yeah, because I don't think that necessarily anybody wants to have a tattoo parlor in Freshfields, as an example. So, but that's more of the risk that I see. It's less the contractual thing. And also from my point of view, I don't think that we need so much more, detail in our ordinances how to handle it, because it is so individual.
So Brad, again, I asked, what is it you're looking for? Because it's,
Well, overall, because we're likely to be presented with a plan develop, I mean, a development agreement, application, not really an application so much.
Well, they do an
It is.
application.
It is an application.
Development agreement.
And then in the near future, and so the question is kind of conceptually going in, how do we want to think about that? And is the idea that the purposes as outlined here of development agreements stated that, encouraging major capital investment facilities, investment commitment, ensuring adequate provision of public facilities for development, encouraging the efficient use of resources, is that kind of capture what our intention or expectation would be around that? Should it be a little bit, are there other things that we might want to be
Well,
thinking?
that I think should come out of the comprehensive plan, right? So when I remember what both John and Luke were talking about earlier, to preserve the characteristic of Kiowa, et cetera, there might be certain, criteria or objectives is probably more the right word, that could be added, right? There could be, designing with nature topics, there could be, environmental protection topics that we need to add. But that's an ordinance change that, any of us can entertain.
And
right?
again,
And that's-
and maybe
that's-
modest or ordinance changes, again, the procedural aspects of, for one reason or another, development agreements are not as robust as for planned development districts and annexation and other things. But, it doesn't mean we can't make it more robust. It's just not required to be anything more than 2 ordinances and 2 public hearings. There are
But
no other
then we
procedures.
also have, as a council, we also have the ability to say, but we want to have a 3rd hearing.
Yes,
Or we
absolutely.
want to
That's what
have a
I'm saying.
charrette.
We have
So individually, because also, again, the development agreements can be so specific and so different from one to another, that it's, I think, the responsibility of the council to make sure that we have the right clauses in place. So, which means to me, less written gives us more room to do the right thing, right? So I don't think that
Well, then,
So, but I would-
that would arguably be the case for then everything else as well, so.
So
or there are some generic overarching comments, like you said, designing with nature. That should be a
that could be,
requirement.
something
Exactly.
that's more where I would look to.
Yes.
I'm less concerned about procedures because we have the ability to alter procedures, right? We are not bound. I see this as a minimum requirement, but not necessarily as the only requirement.
We can always,
But what we should look at is, are the criterias by which we need to look at an application, right? Both the planning commission and then the council, are they comprehensive and are they fitting with the comprehensive plan mission statement and objectives and goals, et cetera. That's more important.
Well, can I ask two questions about these for clarification for me, so, am I correct in assuming that the Planned Development District is a custom negotiated agreement that's going to cover everything, and we can put stuff in or leave stuff out relative to our zoning codes? And the development agreement is basically them locking in our zoning codes for today for some extended period of time. It sounds.
Well, development agreements, as we've seen with our current development agreements, particularly the one with Kiowa Partners, Kiowa Development Partners, Kiowa Resort Associates, that expired last December, it covered a whole heck of a lot more than just locking in our zoning codes.
You
Just
could have more density,
So that was-
building heights, and,
Well, I mean, yeah, you could, yeah, because that's how you got
Right,
65-foot
that's what I was
buildings
bringing up,
down,
yeah.
that we allowed that in exchange supposedly for other stuff. But for an example, there was a provision in there that I always thought was problematic, but be it as it may, it's expired, that, for example, it said, "The town shall not establish its own architectural review commission." I'm not sure that, in fact, the town can constrain itself from exercising its police powers, but that's a separate kind of question. But there were a whole bunch of provisions like that in there, so it became
Well,
this.
that's actually part of my question is, does it just lock in this? Or maybe was that one done incorrectly and they added things beyond the kind of standards?
Well, we don't need to rehash it or relitigate that. That certainly has been my personal view.
So conceptually, you and I, it locks in today's zoning where PDDs, you can have the architectural review board or not, or those type of negotiated agreements.
Well, I'm not sure that the town could ever contract away. I'd be interested in view of council.
You know what I'm saying? It's theoretically, maybe that's a bad
Contract
example, but,
away its police powers to a third party.
okay, so PDDs are truly negotiated, custom, one-offs, where development agreements are theoretically just locking in today's.
Oh,
So
it's-
number
it's-
two is there?
It's a little bit more than that.
Yeah,
So, and that's where I thought we would have our conversation more than over those technicalities, because we are now facing, you know, the wish from the resort for a new development agreement. Although the existing one, if it's valid, has not expired. But we understand the reasons, I would say, why the Goodman family wants to do it. In my personal opinion on observation, is that prior development agreements were maybe not as balanced in its win-win as they should have been. But it's always easy to point fingers backwards. Those were different times, right? But today, you know, when I would be asked, you know, are you for or against a development agreement with the resort, you know, I would say I have no problem to engage into discussions and negotiations over a development agreement under one very important condition. It needs to really, truly create a win-win for both sides. And I think in today's world, the fact that somebody would dedicate a significant financial amount to a certain development is probably not so much anymore a win-win than it might have been perceived in the past. So there might and need to be other elements that would need to be part of a development agreement to create a win-win,
So
right?
what I'm trying to
And
understand-
certain obligations and responsibilities on the side of the town/community to say, yes, we are going to freeze our ordinances, you know, for the next 10 years, and you have absolute security in your planning process and et cetera, but this is what we are getting for this as a community, right? And this could be contribution to amenities. There could be contributions to traffic solutions, et cetera. So just to name two out of a few. But this balancing, you know, I think needs to get a little bit more important than it might have been in the past.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to the understanding why we and/or the developer would do one versus the other. And I thought where I was going was, development agreements are more structured and less negotiated, and PDDs were much more negotiated. So you think they're both
For me, a
negotiated?
PDD is focused on a very particular project and site. Okay, like Freshfields, very dedicated to that particular purpose.
Or
The
DA is-
development agreement, you know, covers a multitude of different properties.
Okay, that's helpful.
and might not go into the same level of detail. but it's both the same, it just has different purposes.
Councilman, just, I think one critical difference is just the timing and duration of development phasing projects. So development agreements are going to tie to, you're thinking about an extensive length of time because you have a larger scale project or a larger area of land that is going to be developed over a period of time. So that's typically the route chosen for a development agreement, to lock in those things over that period of time versus that PDD, as Councilman Heidensfelder just referenced, is essentially just customizing the zoning because you have a project essentially ready to go. Yeah.
And it has no time expiration. Planned development district is, it can be changed in negotiations.
Yeah, and
Development agreement is, the maximum is 10 years.
20.
It depends on the size of the.
25 to 250 is 5, 250 to 2,000 is 10, yeah.
So,
Given the size of our potential, it's only 10 years maximum.
so for clarity purposes, for examples that we are both familiar with and that we can relate to. So a PDD would be applicable to the Upper Beach Walker lots. So let's say 3 or 4 lots.
They could have brought up
So-
PDD.
So just to even further that point, I mean, the original Kiowa was planned development. So a planned development doesn't necessarily have to be just one parcel, but it's just the parameters of a proposal of zoning standards, essentially.
And I'm just trying to bring it into focus for
So-
projects we're familiar with.
Where we are today, Town Hall, Freshfields Village, those are all examples of planned
PDDs.
development, of
This
PDs.
was?
Yes.
Where a development agreement would be, you've got an entity like the resort that's got multiple plots of land that may be developed in many different ways. So a 10-year extension of that development agreement would cover all of the potential scenarios within all of those different plots. Okay, all right.
Which land does a resort have, developable? Less than 250?
Oh, that's right.
If you're including the golf courses, it makes it challenging. Without like golf courses, they're
Yeah, I have read that.
Yeah, it's a minimum
I mean,
25.
It's the idea that it's going to be an inherently longer-term development
Right.
cycle done in phases. And because the developer's starting to invest capital initially, significant amounts of capital in early stages, they don't want to then make sure that 2 years down the road, the zoning
Right.
completely changes and erodes the value of their substantial capital investment that's being phased in over a long period of time. But with something like the, the resort would have, if it wants to develop the properties it owns, it has multiple options. One is to simply develop by right under existing zoning codes, to the extent that there is an expiration of the development agreement, the current.
And they do that under Night Heron, because Night Heron is not under the
correct. Night Heron is not part of the development.
And so, or they could say, let's just focus on West Beach and let's do a planned development district for PDD application just for West Beach. Or they could say, we have a long time horizon, it's gonna be phased in over a period of time, we're not sure when we're going to develop, we're not ready to now, but we'd like the benefits of a certainty as to the application of the zoning standards. And then it's exactly as Michael indicated, then the question is from our side, okay, then the conversation is, what are the benefits to the community from going down?
And what are they? Can you give me some examples of what they might be?
He outlined some of
I
them.
mean, again, it's all part of negotiations, right? So there's no catalog of saying, you have to fulfill this. It's part of negotiations, but it can be related to amenities, right? It can be related to access to amenities, right? Because you
traffic.
remember, some of the amenities of the resort currently are only accessible for Governors Club members, but not necessarily for residents, right? The water parks and stuff like that, right? So those can be topics. It can be topics of contributing to the cost of improving our infrastructure and mitigating traffic, right? So,
Wide open.
well, I mean, within the given circumstances of our island, but it is something that you would bring forward because
Yeah.
either we, or better to say we, in representing the community, feel like those are topics that we see as a benefit for us, so that we get into that win-win situation.
Could even be
Right.
he'll build an art center for us.
Right, and for good or for bad, one example could be at one point, this is, goes back, previous councils, they negotiated a development agreement, the, not building the hotel, where, they said good or for bad, that was part of negotiation for where the Cape is at. They did not, they negotiated not putting a hotel there, in regards to some other
Well, and
issues. As I said, good or bad.
Previous
right.
negotiations actually were.
Some people would say it's good and some people would say it's bad, but those are just some examples.
Okay.
So which means that at some point, when we are going down the road with the resort, assuming that they really want to continue pursuing the idea of a new development agreement, is that we then have to sit down as a council and said, okay, so what's the catalog that we want to take into the negotiations?
And then, so that's the resort, and Marcus here, Kiowa Partners has previously expressed an interest in pursuing a planned development for the Upper Beachwalker parcels. Currently, they're pursuing their by right development rights for just parcel 11 and the church parcel unaddressed are 8, 9, and 10, but 8 and 10 are essentially the same TMS. And some of the things they've indicated they would like to do on that tract are not allowed by right, so I think that was the reason that they were interested in pursuing a planned development district, and sat down with members of the council conceptually and showed that, as well as some members of the impacted regimes in that area. But that's an example of the same type of thing that, okay, happy to have that conversation. And so there's something that you want, there are economic benefits to going down this path. What are the corresponding benefits for the community to doing that relative to by right?
So similar what I said earlier related to a development agreement, those negotiations can also take place with a planned development, right? So you could also, go to the table over, the Upper Beachwalker planned development district, hypothetically, with a catalog of things that you want, the developer to contribute to the community. And that can range from you need to provide access to the public, to residents, to the property owners, for a small fee to go to your pool, to use your pool as another amenity, right? I mean, that's part of the negotiations. But in both cases, PDD or development agreement, you can enter the conversation with things that you want to achieve for the benefit of the community. If you're successful or not is then dependent on the negotiations.
Very helpful.
I did not hear that we are opposed to a development agreement or a PDD application if it creates a win-win. Yeah.
One thing that I would note for the record that has been an issue in the past under our development agreement, and whether or not it necessitates a ordinance change, but my reading, and I believe the current town council's reading, not necessarily the prior town council's reading, is that development agreements have to be by state law passed by ordinance. And state law requires that major modifications, that's not defined in state law, be passed the same way. Many of the prior amendments to development agreements here in the town have simply been passed by resolution. My view is that is apart from state law, entirely inappropriate. It should go through the same public hearing process, first reading, public hearing, and second reading at the very least. Okay, we've already covered annexation, the topic in the earlier conversation. I'm not sure.
Well, around the comprehensive plan.
I mean, we talked about it, but are we open to it, or are we opposed to it, or, because I think that's what you wanted to learn here.
Well, I thought we were providing some sense of that, so we can certainly kind of go, but we can certainly go around. I mean, I'm happy to express kind of my view, and I did a little bit, and I thought others did, but yes, please, if you, we can certainly spend a few minutes.
No, I mean, if you guys are fine, I just wanted to make sure that we have given enough guidance.
Well, one thing we didn't discuss would be the potential additional revenue annexation may provide. Now, that may be important if our revenues continue to go down. That may be important, and we don't yet know, we don't have a good feeling on what's going to happen in the next 2 or 3 years with respect to our revenues. But if we have a continuing decline, that may be something we should consider.
So it ties in, I guess, a little bit to the last topic as well. Some of that's going to be informed by getting better data on what the real trend lines
Correct.
are. While we've had a trend I mean, there are some pressures on certain revenue sources, but basically, for the most part, only new building.
Right, well, the challenge is that, you know, from a mathematical perspective, we have one data point of reference where we have a decrease in revenue. One data point doesn't mean it's a trend, but we have one data point going down.
What we do know is there will be fewer new single-family home building permits in the future. Likely over time to be some increase in building permits for renovations.
For renovations,
That doesn't
right.
generate as much.
Right.
What we do know is that there's a significant lumpiness because a lot of the building permit revenues are related to large projects.
True.
And I think we've already onboarded, correct me if I'm wrong, fees from Upper and Lower.
Correct, we have.
Beach Walker.
Yes, we have.
Well, we have West Beach at
We've already-
some
we've
point.
West Beach.
West Beach,
Oh, West
East
Beach.
Beach.
Yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, that's coming.
We have West Beach at some point.
At some point, but until then, you know, and there was no signal based on the Roger Warren's report from when that might occur, and they have a long-term horizon on this stuff. So there will definitely be some decline in
One would think.
building
One would
permit
It
revenues.
might be, yeah. But that's the discussion that I was seeking to. Because you can have, and that we touched on that one, you know, when we talked about the comprehensive plan, you know, yes, you could define as an objective for annexation growth, right, and expansion, and more income, right? That's one of the possible, you know, driving elements, right? I would be, even under the scenario that Russ describes, you know, very, very hesitant to make that an element of decision, you know, the growth, the bigger, the more revenue stream for the town, because also we shouldn't forget, we also still have other possibilities to increase our revenue stream. But I would be very hesitant to have growth in all of these different aspects a driving element for us to consider annexation or not. I would be in favor, though, if annexation provides two benefits. One is what I think Luke pointed out earlier when we talked about the Kiewa Next, is really to have more influence in how our neighborhoods that are close, really close to us, which for me is everything from this roundabout, the Freshfield roundabout, onwards, that we have more influence on what happens on these properties instead of leaving this with a county that are far less invested in that particular topic than we are. So that would be my only, or one of the two key driving elements. And the second one is the benefit for the community. So when you, for example, asked me, you know, should we consider, if we are asked, you know, to annex Endel West at some point, then I would say yes, because I think this has a benefit for the community if Freshfields North and Freshfield South is all one, right, under one jurisdiction, from police to whatsoever, right? So those, for me, would be the only two elements really to look at when it comes to a question about annexation, but not the growth, the more people, the more revenue, et cetera. I don't think that those are good reasons for
Well, I
us
was
to
only
annex.
looking at it as a replacement of the revenue. I'm not saying I don't really want growth either. I'm just saying if we do have a significant drop-off in revenue, we have to figure out how to replace it. Doesn't have to be annexation, that's just an option.
So
It's just an option.
a couple of mayors ago, I think staff had done some work on looking at both revenues and cost associated with certain annexation options. And there may be revenues attached, associated with annexation. There may be, there will be at least some expenditures, maybe even more expenditures.
Could be.
Than, so my personal predilection is much the same as Councilmember Heidingsfelder's in that I would not rank high, and maybe not rank at all, annexation solely to generate additional revenue.
Yeah, I was only throwing that out as an option for consideration. If we have to
That's what
find
part
a
of the
source-
conversation, yeah.
If we have to have a source of additional revenue to replace what we're losing, that's an option to consider.
It certainly is, and we should talk about the other levers.
Right.
There are other levers
Right.
for increasing revenues, then there's also issues with respect to better cost expenditure controls.
That as well.
But one of the issues, certainly I would have personally no hesitation about property right if they're, and wanted to come and entertain, they were willing to sell to us and we'd annex that and put it in conservation easement. Same thing if the Goodwin family wanted to sell and we could afford to buy some of the property around Freshfields and Andale West, and we could put it into conservation easement and annex that. Personally speaking, I'm fine with that. I might respectfully not disagree, but not unequivocally embrace the idea of annexing Andale West only because I want to think through the issue, the implications with regard to future councils' actions, which we could not then control because that does create contiguity. And there are these odd constructs required under state law to be able to annex property. It has to be contiguous to currently existing. But if you didn't annex Freshfields, Andale West, then you could not actually, future council could not annex the other lands that were not otherwise contiguous. So that's just something to kind of think about whether we want to, assuming anything was presented to us, think about the implications of having more contiguous land and what future councils might.
So what was the step?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, fair enough.
Stephanie, what was the logic behind it at the time for annexing Freshfields then?
Oh, well, I wasn't here, so I have no idea. But I would guess, do you know? Okay.
So
Maybe Mark
they
knows, he
actually-
was here.
Mark, don't correct me if this is wrong, but my recollection and understanding was they came to us and wanted to be annexed because they wanted to attach the Kiowa brand to it and thought that it would be more valuable if it was part of the town of Kiowa Island. Is that your
Yeah,
recollection, or is it?
it's aligned with what you just said.
And what do we get in return for that? Do you have any idea?
Tax revenues.
Well, was there anything else, Mark, besides just wanting to
Well,
keep it
I
brand?
mean, originally it was in the unincorporated area, a planned development district was approved for it, as you are aware of. When which development agreement was it? The 2005? Yeah. It had a provision. Yeah, I think it was 2005. No, what I'm setting up is the development agreement in 2005 had two provisions in it that included Freshfields and Cacique. And the option was for the town to consider bringing it into the town limits for either one of those or both. the Freshfields plan development as previously approved, and the standards associated with it were folded in. There was an agreement, per what you were saying, that the thought process was controlled by the town of a front door entrance, land use, not just what was built in place, but the future land uses that were allowed in it. The CASIC, the town was willing to incorporate that, but the community, the property owners of CASIC didn't want it. They,
You know why? I'm just curious.
we were, I think we were all surprised. They were, I don't know, to be honest. I can't remember.
No, fair enough.
But I don't know
Yeah,
if
but
actually,
they chose not to opt in.
yeah, I don't know if actually, but this brings up kind of my point in this is, to the extent we want to use annexation as a tool for whatever purpose, it's going to be very important for us to control the dialogue and control the narrative. That's what
Mark,
blew
could
us
you
up.
hold on for a second? Mark? Could you hold on for a second? I do want to ask you one follow-up.
That's what blew up the Endell West, in great part, in my opinion, that we didn't control the narrative, and the narrative became very bad, very negative. And people didn't understand that what the benefits to the town were. They just thought that it was a deal done behind closed doors, and there was too many residents, and there was a lot of issues that never got put on the table. So for us to control the narrative on anything it's going to be critically important, because it's the landowner who wants to be annexed. We don't annex people, they ask to be annexed, broadly speaking.
So,
Right, the narrative was horribly,
well,
narrative was terrible.
and even if the then council had done a better job of controlling the narrative, just let's remember what transpired. It wasn't just the narrative, it was the process was followed, number one. But what people keep forgetting, and Roger just said he thought it was a mistake not to annex, recall that the applicant was not seeking to just be annexed. The annexation was stapled to a very specific development plan. And the applicant was insisting that that development plan be adopted at the same time as annexation. That development plan itself not only had the 500 dwelling units, but people didn't pay much attention to the fact that it had 55-foot tall buildings, it wasn't taller than Freshfields, reduced setbacks, changed the zoning text, the text to the zoning code to say that the purpose of our zoning code was to support all of Johns Island. And there were a whole host of things.
But that's, for me, I totally agree, other than I think it was 350, not 500. But I totally agree, but that, for me, is part of the narrative, that the developer is saying, we need to disclose this and staple this, do that. We control what we take in and when we deliver it and how quickly we do it and how it's explained. That part of it is really important. And the second part, and this is a little bit more subtle, is just understanding how developers work. They ask it for 500 or 350, they overreach. They probably didn't really want that many, they probably wanted 100. But they overreached, and in the community said 350, that's way too big, and then it exploded in our face. So all of that vernacular, it could have been maybe more acceptable at a different level. If it's controlled, the town will want it, maybe, and the developer will want it. But if it's uncontrolled,
Well, and one would hope, certainly this council would not say, well, we just received this on a Friday afternoon, and by the way, we've scheduled first reading for the following Tuesday after Labor Day Monday, and the first public hearing on that following Tuesday.
that was a disaster.
Which added a little bit of a suspicious air to it.
So that's, again, that's what I'm saying we should guard against, exactly that.
Mark, I just, you may have the better kind of from a historical perspective on this. It wasn't clear to me, it's never been clear to me, how did the town annex Andell West?
You mean Freshfield?
You mean?
Freshfields.
Freshfield. They did it simultaneous with the rezoning.
What I mean is, the town at that time was only Kiowa Island
No,
and the road.
no,
What else?
they own this,
This land?
didn't they? I forget when they owned, when did you purchase this property? But they
We
own
purchased
the
this
right-of-way.
But owning, this wasn't contiguous, though, to the town. You can own land, the town can own
The
land.
right-of-way makes it contiguous.
No, it doesn't. A road, particularly under state law, the right-of-way, a road
Well,
cannot
that changed when
create-
they changed, they used to allow that, that's why they changed the law, because people were using roads, rivers, and streams.
Yeah.
So when this was annexed, it may have been the law at the time. I just
Yeah.
have to go
Yeah,
back and
Annexed
see.
in
the road-
2013. I didn't think the
The
contiguity.
the Parkway Road went all the way out to the intersection with,
What I'm saying is, under state law, it specifically says the road cannot create contiguity. Okay.
At one point, but I know at one point it did allow that, and it was changed. Now, I have to go back and see when that law changed, but at one point, municipalities all across South Carolina used roads, rivers, and streams, whatever else they could to annex.
Yeah.
And then it changed. I just don't remember the year, but they were using DOT's
I just
road
remember
and-
it being part of the assessment, and I don't remember when rules
I think
changed.
that's probably the question, because I think,
Yeah. right.
nevertheless, yeah,
Right.
there's some.
I think the topic of potential, influence over land use is a really important one, because we all know that as of today, the holdings of the A&L on both sides, there are entitlements on there. And by way of example, I think it's R4. And by way of example, a lot of these subdivisions on Johns Island are all in R4 districts. So in theory, the landowner could do a subdivision. It's not as if there's no development on there. So the idea, I'm just one property owner in the camp of the more we can influence as our community, either directly or indirectly, but is a good thing.
Well, and I don't disagree with that. We were, as a community, able to well influence Annandale West,
Right.
even though it was not under our jurisdiction, the town's jurisdiction. It was within the Charleston County. So.
And as far as why Cassique didn't want to be annexed, don't quote me on this, but I had something to do with the preference to be under the county's zoning or tax laws, or they felt that there was a benefit to staying under the county's jurisdiction as opposed to Kiowa's.
I think there's a lot of probably urban myths going around about that. When I started, I was told that that the community was almost ready to come into under the town of Kiowa. Then all of a sudden, there was this big push and disinformation that has something to do with Kika and different things. So that's what I heard, kind of all of the misinformation was put out there. People scared that Kika would come in, and that's kind of, people were equating being annexed in the town of Kiowa would require you to be part of Kika. That's what I heard.
Narratives changed then. So we. That's what I heard. Rumors and gossip. Yeah. Okay.
So we're drawing close to our allotted time, yes, and maybe a brief, well, he actually was.
so let's move on.
I was going to give him, so maybe, because I know you may have some obligations, Aaron, do you want to kind of give the council a quick update on some of the strategic communications initiatives in the nearer and longer term?
Sure. Okay. So I'll quickly go through some of the slides because I know we're stretched for time, but I did want to go over some of the platforms that we use for the community, and one of our most popular is our e-newsletter. I did want to highlight that we have changed the format. We used to have a feature article and then just a lot of different articles under it. And since we've changed it with town updates at the top, which highlight 6 different topics. And then we have other updates at the bottom, and it has increased our open rate by about 2%. It also increased our click-through rate by a couple of percents as well. Podcasts, our town council members help us with those. Those are primarily led by just community leaders on a variety of different topics. Social media, we have a Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And so those are some of the engagement rates. You'll see that we're higher than the industry average for all of our platforms. So connecting with property owners, some of the ways that we do that are what I listed on the earlier slide, and then we also have a mobile app. We utilize printed materials for a variety of different reasons. One new this year, to promote Lights Out for turtles, we sent a mailer to all the beachfront properties. So we've used those as well. Some new strategies moving forward. I know that yesterday you had vocalized, and I actually had already thought about this, but just the general different communication tools that we use and how residents are aware of those tools. So there may be people that don't know about our e-newsletter, for example. Last year we did send out a message through IKEA. We did promote all of those different channels through that. But this could potentially be a mailer that we send out to all of our property owners. And then we could also create a web page that just consolidates all those different channels so people know what they can sign up for or follow. Julie, up at the front, she sends out a solid waste packet to all new homeowners. So I talked to her about potentially adding things onto that packet. And we could use this in a variety of different ways, but this would be a way to kind of target new homeowners when they join the island. And then also providing a community survey to receive feedback on the town service and opportunities forward. So for short-term rentals, some of the ways that we engage with them are through our Good Neighbor brochure, which we've updated this year. Those are sent to all of the rental companies, and they actually utilize this brochure when they have new rentals. They also utilize this within their rental properties as well. So new strategies moving forward could be starting conversations with some of the property managers, and this could be sending a survey to understand if there's additional ways that we aren't reaching their renters that we could. We're also going to be creating a island rules video, and so we can promote this as another visual for them to use as part of their communications.
So the island rules video would include things like leash laws? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What you're talking about there is separate with what apparently the Kika and CVB are now working
So that's a
together.
publication, potentially.
That's a publication only. I thought there might also
No,
be-
that's going to be like a printed publication potentially, or something online that they would link to. But this would be a video that we would promote on like our website and various other places.
And it'll include things like the turtle and nesting and, okay.
Yeah. And Neil is starting to collect B-roll footage for that, so it's going to be a big project. But so also another target audience is our guests and visitors. Some ways that we connect with them are through our website, social media, and CVB Visitor Center up in the lobby. So a couple of new strategies. We're working with CVB. They're going to be creating a new Kiowa Landing webpage, and so we're going to work with them and then work with the other partners that, like the resort and Andale Inn and all of those different entities, to make sure that everything is consolidated where it needs to be. And then we are currently working on a video with Jim Jordan and the CVB. It's going to be a wildlife feature on all the unique wildlife that's on Kiowa and how to protect it while they're visiting. And then, as I mentioned, the Island Rules video will also just give kind of a more user-friendly format to some of our island rules for visitors. And we're going to put that on a variety of different channels that would touch them. So these are just some of the projects that we work throughout the year to promote. Obviously, all of our departments, public safety, right now it's a big one that we're promoting hurricane preparedness. Various development projects throughout the year. Wildlife, there's a lot of different reminders that people need to be aware of to keep them safe and wildlife safe, so we work with that department throughout the year. And then, of course, some of our services like recycling, solid waste services, and then our Arts Council events programming. We have representation on both the Kiowa Goes Green work group as well as Marsh Management work group, and so we work with both of those groups on a variety of ways to promote the different messages that they want to the community. So some of those, with Kiowa Goes Green, we created a video that's going to show some of the outcomes of that work group. We participated for both of these work groups in the Conservancy's Earth Day event. So this was just kind of a public outreach opportunity to kind of share cross-contamination information, as well as the marsh management education. We also have created a variety of different educational pieces. Some of those have been with composting and then our recycling program. And then Madeline has been instrumental with marsh management, and we've worked with her on a variety of podcasts coming up on different visuals with the marsh to make people more aware of the marsh and protecting it. So moving forward, we have, for our podcasts and videos, we have a new video production specialist. And so he has created a request form. And so what this will be is we'll send you the form, you fill it out. It just gives us all the information we need so we can give you the best product. And then he has a production schedule, so you can also see when he has availability as well, so we can schedule some of the podcasts upcoming. But we'll give you all that information through email soon. I also wanted to touch on arts and cultural events, which also falls under our department. So for this season, we had 34 total events, and 10 of these sold out of tickets. We had more than 6,500 attendees across all of these events, and this was a 25% increase from last season. Upcoming, we have new Facebook and Instagram pages that are being created. We also have a community survey that's been pushed out to understand what residents and those that are interested in participating in future events might want to see, and what they liked about the current season. We have a couple of new members. We have one new member that's joined council, another that's likely to join. We have already started booking the next season, and we have some of the same issues that we've had in the past with scheduling various venues, and just the flexibility that comes with scheduling the artists and the agents along with those venues. Professionalizing events will likely increase costs, and extra funds may be needed in the future. We have insurance costs as well as security that we've looked into, just because some of these events are highly attended and we want everyone to be safe while they're at them. And then I also wanted to give a brief update on the Arts Center, the Low Country Arts Center. So after the Arts Center feasibility study last year, the path forward was Arts Council members potentially working to create a different nonprofit 501(c)(3). So a couple of those members separate from the town formed that in January of this year. They received IRS approval as a nonprofit in March. Some of the board of directors include residents of Kiowa, Charleston, Seabrook, and Johns Island. So this would potentially open the audience to all those different areas. And the newly formed organization is in the early stages, still trying to gather community support for the project, reviewing the feasibility study, which gave them a lot of good information, exploring funding possibilities and examining site potentials. And then they've been in contact with Riverstone about potentially Andale West, as a possible site. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Aaron. Any questions or comments for Aaron?
Aaron, could you remind me about some of the data points for the newsletter? How many emails we have in total, and how many of those are actually property owners and not contractors and others? I remember some of the numbers, but I'm not.
I don't have them off the top of my head. I mean, I know our total subscriber list is about 10,000, but that doesn't just include property owners, of course. I can look back at that list.
I remember, but I don't know if that was you or your predecessor that said something. We have, among those 10,000, probably not even 3,000 being property owners. Does that sound right to you?
I think that's pretty close.
That's what.
But again, that was our normal list.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that 4,000, well, maybe it's like 4,500, 4,900. I don't know how many of those are actually property owners.
Okay.
I know we send out to about 40, just for that list, 4,900, and then we pull in the Arts Council list and all these other lists.
Right.
And now you're confusing me. So
Yeah, then those would overlap, wouldn't they?
So, no, not necessarily. We have some people, when people sign up for our e-blast, they can sign up to just get Arts Council information. Then we have one that's a general, and we have one that's for short-term rental property managers, and we have contractors. And so sometimes when we send out the e-blast, they pull from all those sources, but under constant contact, I don't think it may duplicate some, or it may know and not send people. So if someone signs up for Arts Council, they may have already also signed up for a regular, or I don't know if they're in there twice or if they're just in there once. That part I don't.
They shouldn't be in there twice. So people right now can sign up for Town News or Arts, but we also have distribution lists that we've created. So like the Bobcat Guardianship Program, we asked if we could use their information, and so we've created a list. So every year when we want to have those people renew, we have that. So there's certain lists that we don't use for our weekly e-newsletter, but some of them we've built, essentially.
So, and that's where I'm heading. I mean, whatever the number is of real property owners, but I was always operating under the assumption that probably less than half of property owners really receive the newsletter, either by choice or by not knowing about it. So one of the questions would be, should we use any other email address we have from building licenses, from our waste collection, from the arts center, et cetera, to use all of those emails that are not in the news blast, to have a dedicated, maybe once a quarter or once every 6 months, kind of a nice email that invites them to subscribe, just so that we can step-by-step broaden the number of property owners that are really subscribing to our newsletter, so that we have a broader distribution of our communication.
So where are you saying the emails would come from, like the email addresses?
Well, I mean, we have email addresses, I was told, but please correct me if I'm wrong. We have emails when somebody applies for a business license, for a building license, a building permit. We have emails related to the Arts Council, but they are not the news blast for whatever reason. We might have emails, in Julie's statistics about waste collection.
Backdoor service.
So backdoor service and stuff like that. So I think we have, I was told, different databases, of course, that's not in one, but in different places in the town, additional email addresses of people that have yet not subscribed. So the question would be to find them, to eliminate those doubles, and then send out a nice friendly reminder, shouldn't you also subscribe to our newsletter? Just so that we are step by step able to build more emails into our weekly e-blast.
So there are messages that we can send through Citizen Serve directly to those individuals. So that's a potential that we could invite them that way. Putting them all into our e-news distribution, there
That's,
might.
no. People
Okay.
have to subscribe.
Got
I'm
it.
just saying we could basically create a separate Excel sheet, right, with all the email addresses we have in different places, but they are not yet subscribed. And then send out an e-blast, but only to those and only with the focus of inviting them to subscribe.
We can do that. The other option, which is what a for-profit entity would do, is just send it out and you have to unsubscribe.
Another possibility, although I don't really like that.
I
so much.
don't generally, but nonetheless, I mean, to the extent we're getting out important information.
No matter how we're doing it, but I think I would prefer that we are putting a little bit more effort into increasing the number of subscribers.
Well, I
And we
think
can use Kika for this, and we have done that in the past, that Kika actually sent out little articles in their endless newsletter, of course, to please subscribe, right? And maybe a few have. But there are elements of communication we haven't used yet to increase the number of subscribers, and I would really like to pursue that.
And especially in light of what both you and Brad said yesterday about so many people not even knowing that there was an election.
Exactly.
If we can expand knowledge, let's try. There's no harm in that kind of initiative.
So Aaron, what would you suggest, given that fact that people who were eligible to vote didn't know there was an election? As the communications director, what would you suggest?
So one of the ways that I talked with Brad was the mailer, potentially. I know that would reach all the different, they potentially, if they're not reading their email, maybe they're reading their mail. I know that Kika during that also pushed our election, so we were pushing it and they were pushing it. Kika, their distribution list is any resident in Kiowa, so any property owner. Oh, okay, I thought it was every single person. Okay, I didn't hear that,
I
but,
think if their email's on file. If their email's on file, they have it. But Some
Okay.
people don't have emails.
got it, okay. So we were pushing it on a variety of different electronic ways, but maybe it needs to be more of a physical format.
We should have we would obviously would have the ability, when we want to incur the expense of what would go into it and what situations we use it, is simply to mail to every property owner on Kiowa. A mailing, whether it's one time, whether it's only related to an upcoming election, or whether it's a once a year thing that includes, you know.
And the town has done that in the past.
Yeah.
I remember that some years back, we have this yearly brochure,
It was town notes. We used to do the town notes.
town notes, and there was a print one, and that was sent to everybody, but then prior council ended that because of cost.
Cost, but in part because
Well, not-
it was quarterly, I thought.
It used to be quarterly, but not only because of cost. What happened is that more and more people did not want a print version, and then it just became we were only printing a few, and then it became we stopped mailing them, and then we just started printing a few and putting them out at various locations.
But it just, given the experience in the election, it just may, whether, again, maybe we only do it in conjunction with, elections or something, but or we may want to think about just whether something relatively simple can go out once a year and it references all these other communication engagement tools. I don't know. But we need to be able to get to every single property owner with certain kinds of information.
So, I will say I'm in a class with a lot of folks where I feel like I'm inundated with emails from the town and from Kiowa, or Kika, and the emails have 5 or 6 pieces in it. In my experience, and I think I was pretty good about this, in looking for the election from Kika in particular, if it was there, I remember seeing it once and it was buried like 4 headings down. In your experience, is there a way to work with Kika such that we may do one thing like an election and it be the only thing they send out, or are they just going to do it in the big blast that they do every day?
They rarely do that. I know that with not this election, but the one prior, they were very hesitant because they were having an election the same time as us, and they were worried there was going to be confusion a lot of times if we push out they push out our election information, they'll push it out, but then they get people very confused that it's the town's election and not their board of directors election.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But again, I mean, I think whatever we can do, step by step, nobody expects us, or we don't expect, I guess, to have, 9,000 email addresses in a short period of time. But I would encourage us to really do a few things to see if they can help us to increase the number of subscribers. Not going overboard, but at least to use what we have and then see if people are willing to subscribe.
Would you be open, I had mentioned the Get Connected mailer earlier, which would connect with all the different pieces, so it'd be e-news, social media, all the different ways that we connect. Is that something that would be of interest for us to pursue? Okay,
I think
to
so.
mail to
I
property
mean,
owners.
if you make it very easy with a postcard with a 3D code.
Yep. Okay,
Yeah, postcard is key, less expensive.
Yeah.
okay.
But use everything that you can think of convincing email addresses to subscribe. So.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron, before you go, what about, is there any way to know what the subscribership is to, like, the emergency notices from the town? Do we know what that is?
You mean Code Red?
Code Red.
You mean how many people are subscribed to it?
How many town residents, yeah?
I believe it's, know the total. I'm trying to think what it is. I think it's around 3,000. It might be higher than that. I can look at that information.
Which is
and
another
give it
source
back
to
to
look
you.
at, right? So we have so many different databases. If we would find an easy way with big data analytics to make a comparison who already is subscribed and who's not, put them in the list and send out an e-blast to them, maybe 20% will subscribe, and there are another 200-300 people that we can add to the e-blast.
I will say with Code Red, we don't have access to any of the contact information, unfortunately.
And that's our emergency. We only use that for emergency purposes.
But again, other
Right,
sources.
right. Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Covered about everything. Madeline and Michael want to,
Budgetary considerations?
well, we talked a little bit about that. We can talk about that further, although I'm not sure we talked about kind of what we need to look at in terms of longer-term trends. We don't have a lot of information yet as to how, because we don't have information about all the trends, how they're necessarily going to impact our,
Well, when you say proposed projects, what are you referring to? Proposed projects there, under budgetary? Oh, okay.
no, but, but that's,
I mean, one topic we could discuss.
well,
if-
actually, I mean, what that could, for example, and this it relates a little bit to the reserve study.
Oh, could be, yes.
We've talked about, we have reserves, or I said a huge reserves, but, I'm thinking that at some point in the relatively near future, we're gonna have to repave. No idea what that costs, zero. Then we've got whether we need to do anything, whether we're still thinking about something at the front intersection, what that costs, what it might cost to, if we wanted to, the priority became raising the KIP to address
At Mingo
nuisance,
Point.
at Mingo Point to address nuisance flooding.
Well, I
You know,
think we should do that.
So, well, that's, we've got to have a sense of some kind of back of the envelope cost estimate, just to understand how we prioritize.
And that was done a few years back, which is probably not accurate anymore because material has increased so much. But those things were done. But that's I think why a public works committee, might be worth consideration, because that's a typical project for them to investigate and bring back. And maybe more timely or easier to perform topic under budget consideration as it relates again to the top line would really to have a little benchmarking project to look at our fees, business license fees, building permit fees, planning department fees, et cetera, and compare them to other municipalities if we are actually competitive.
I thought we had already directed staff previously to do that.
That was one of the things that we were going to put on the agenda for this, for this discussion, but we decided to have it at a Ways and Means. So depending on the agenda for June, was going to start the discussion where they're pulling, all three departments are pulling together. Because Building Services, he has done some research in regards to, we haven't raised our fees, I think since 2018 or 2013. Dorota wanted to talk about it, and I think John had put on it as well. So we were going to put that on the Ways and Means.
And if we're going to be talking about the paving of Beach Walker, I think that might be a very good opportunity to use pervious surface materials. And if there was ever a road that needed good absorption, and I'm sure that there are entities across the island that would love to help us finance that. Thank you.
Well,
Actually, it's not a bad idea for a test case to see.
It's not, I'm not kidding around the paving
everybody
of
have a
it.
good handle, maybe, Dorota's not here, but what levers we can actually pull? What can we control in terms of adjusting fee levels? Because not all of our revenue sources are one. Some of those are set by state law or.
Well, the fee, so the development services fees set by council is set by, ordinance, so you all can make those changes as you see fit. The other ones that are set by state law are the restrictive ones, hospitality, local and county and state. And just going off memory, hospitality, I want to say we can go up to, I think, 2%, and we're at 1%, so you can go up another percent on that. And I believe one of the other ones may be county or local, or maybe local. I know that we're not at the full percentage of that as well, and we can go up on that. So there are things that by law, by state statute, there is a cap, but council has not set that percentage, with the exception maybe the state, have not set that percentage to the cap. So you have room. Now, granted, those are restricted funds, but you can go up on that and go up on, like I said, the other fees that they want to talk about, business license, building permit, and planning services, so development fees. You can put in, I think the discussion was centered around a marsh management fee. One of the things we did look at.
I'm talking about the ones that actually move.
Yeah. One of the things we looked at, and I know I hate to even mention this, but we have done this, staff, we've done this several times, several years ago when we were looking at essentially the what ifs in regards to a storm. If we're hit really bad, what are our resources as a municipality? We can go out for bonds, and we can go out for bonds at a set amount. It all depends on your on the total assessed value. Council can go up to a certain amount. Once you want to go over that, you have to have a referendum. But one of the things that we also talked about is property tax. We could, because when the town incorporated, that's essentially when you had your opportunity to say yay or nay. If you want to go into the, impose property tax. So Kiowa, we do not impose property tax, but for emergency purposes, you can look at imposing property tax. You sunset it, you have to establish what the need is for. Those are things that when we did our kind of risk assessment, and we have essentially a report looking at the various different revenue sources that we can pull from, we did that to include all the other things through state statute that we have not reached that we can tap into if need be.
What about franchise fees?
Franchise fees. Ours, the ones that we have and control, yes, you guys can do that. The ones that are coming like through the utility, I think the state sets that, yeah. And insurance also comes through that, through the state.
So similar to a fee structure benchmarking kind of comparison, could Dorota also provide us with where we have influence to increase to the maximum level, as you mentioned, from 1% to 2%,
somewhat-
and tell us the amount of what would
Yes.
be, so that we understand a little bit, is it material or not?
Okay.
As part of the sitting down with Dorota and Stephanie and on capturing everybody's changes to the draft budget, as part of that exercise, I want a better understanding of what levers are that we can pull, both to control expenditures and revenues. Planning fees, for example, I'm sure we can adjust planning fees, but the total amount of planning fees is $10,000. I mean, it just, it's like a rounding error, almost, is one example, where there are other things that are actually much more meaningful in terms of addressing budget.
Yeah, but still, even there, with the planning fees, if we have I mean, I'm sure we have, cost of $200,000 or if not more for the planning department, and having only, less than 10%, 5% maybe covered by the fees, that already gives us a little bit of an indication that we might need to change something. Also, just out of pure fairness, right?
Also comes back to enforcement and enforcement fees too, for everything.
Well, I mean, certainly what Dr. Heidensfelder and Stephanie, I mean, DeRote had been doing in terms of auditing, and there's probably some increase in business license revenues that will result from greater enforcement. But the overall, the fines, I'd say, even with better enforcement, I'm not sure, even a lot better enforcement, that's going to be a needle mover as a revenue source at $500 per.
Right, yeah, I don't, oh, yeah. And if you're referring to fines, we don't even recoup most of those fines. A lot of it go to the state. But of course, we don't obviously want to fine because we're using some revenue. We don't want to budget. In all my years in previous jurisdictions as a city manager, I don't budget fines because you don't want to give the impression, because I ran we had a police department, and of course, we didn't want to be, people were saying, well, you're creating your budget through fines. So we don't do
A
that.
significant revenue source in Washington DC is speeding fine revenue. It's a substantial revenue source.
Put on paper. You may do it, but you don't put it on paper.
It could be one here as well.
Actually, I haven't gotten one in at least more than a decade.
No wonder they're losing money.
So, it's coming up on the witching hour. I mean, Michael or Madeline, do you, is it anything you want to share with council members regarding next steps on Phase 3?
Well, Michael and I need to get together to fill out the rest of our side of the work group. I'm not sure. I think Kika may have added an extra person. So we would want to go up to 5 from the town as well, the 2 of us, and then.
Just replaced you.
No, they replaced you.
But didn't they add one more?
Not that I know. They only replaced you
Discussion
with
of
one.
it, so.
But anyway, so we have to refill one on our side. Madeline and I are working on a list that has already been several names on it. It was my understanding that there's a request in today's newsletter. I haven't seen it yet. Is there a request for an application for the ARB work group in our newsletter this week? Okay. So we probably have to discuss that for next week, and then we'll see what happens. But in the meanwhile, I would expect that after this busy week, that next week is really more dedicated again to that work group, and I will reach out to Kevin to make sure we gain momentum again on this one starting next week.
Any council member comments concluding?
Unless I was napping, I don't remember anything for the Sea Island Performing Arts.
That was the local Country Arts Center.
Although the label was Low Country Arts Center. Would you like a quick recap on
No,
that?
if you can do it in 5, no, I'm just,
It was at the end of her presentation.
there you go, it was the last
The
slide.
last bullet point.
Nothing for me other than thank you for, entertaining all my questions and helping me learn here for my first strategy meeting. So thank you all.
Me too, I learned a lot. This is very, very helpful. Thanks to all the staff as well.
Well, there's a lot we've onboarded as potential action items. We can't do everything. So we're going to have to capture all this and figure out how best to prioritize.
No comments.
Yes, thank you. Thank you to the staff as well for your inputs. I appreciate it. We are adjourned 15 minutes early, and I hope everyone has a delightful weekend. Thank you. Yes?
And happy Mother's Day to those of us who are.
Thursday.